Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, December 11th, 2021, and today we're going to be taking a look at the state of Florida and the Democratic Party within this state that has found themselves at a very unfortunate position as they enter into the 2022 midterm elections behind Ron DeSantis, the governor of the state of Florida, who has been pretty popular over the past year itself, in addition to Marco Rubio, the popular senator, both of which Republicans running for re-election in 2022. The Florida Democratic Party seems to be at odds internally and externally about what they need to do for the upcoming midterms. And recently they elected Manny Diaz, who represented the Democratic Party in the city of Miami, and he was heralded as this turnaround artist. Now, I remember when he was chosen to chair the Democratic Party and in the state of Florida, and there was a lot of excitement, I think, on the Democratic side, primarily because he was the one person that the Democratic Party trusted to change the trajectory of their race. And now you are starting to see the Florida Democratic Party crumble in on itself as they find themselves in a very poor position entering into the 2022 year. Now, I've highlighted some key parts of this political argument, including the title, which I think speaks for itself, in which it says that the Florida Democrats are already pointing fingers as they steel themselves for 2022, for November, the upcoming midterms. Now, this makes sense. The way that the Democratic Party has treated the state of Florida has been very unfortunate for the eventual outcome of the race. Joe Biden lost here, Hillary Clinton lost here. The Democrats haven't had a statewide victory since 2012. And this has been a point of contention routinely for the Democratic Party as they have failed to capture any significant portion of the vote. Their most recent victory, and I do say this to not correct myself because they haven't had a major statewide victory, but they did have a statewide victory, one in particular in 2018, the Commissioner of Agriculture race in which Nikki was able to win by less than a quarter of a percentage point. But ultimately, I mean, that was just a one-off victory and all, probably just due to lack of enthusiasm for that race specifically on the GOP side, but Democrats really haven't had much luck across the state of Florida. But as we go through this, we see things about the Florida GOP overtaking the Democratic Party in terms of voter registration for the first time in decades. That's huge news. Ron DeSantis demolishing his 3 Democratic challengers in fundraising for next year's governor race. And Democrats have yet to recruit a full slate of candidates to challenge the 3 Republicans who sit on the state cabinet. You're talking about some very big positions that Democrats want to be able to contest, and it would make it a lot better for an eventual Democratic governor if they were to win against Ron DeSantis if they also had people that were elected to the state cabinet on the Democratic side. But looking at the way that they treated Manny Diaz, some people were not so happy with him, saying that he was MIA. But there were others that were super supportive, including the candidates across the state itself. But Democrats were very worried, not necessarily about the state chair, but more about their own competitive nature and about whether or not they could actually win in the state of Florida. And Democrats here apparently fretted over whether or not they were doing enough to outreach voters. And in addition, whether or not Florida was still competitive. And this type of discussion, I think, ultimately is what has screwed over the Democratic Party in the state of Florida through a multitude of elections. They look at Florida and they look at the electoral history and say, there's no way in heck that we are able to win this state, yet routinely it somehow is always close. I kid you not. Let's go back in time a bit to actually dispel this idea and rumor that the state of Florida is a red state. It may have Republican leadership, and Republicans may have been fortunate enough to end up winning in this state, but it doesn't mean that it's a red state. States can be very competitive, but this is not to say that, without a doubt, in every situation, Florida would go red, because Democrats have had very good performances, just sometimes it isn't enough. But this idea that Florida isn't competitive is just completely false, that there is no more of a competitive nature in Florida. This is why Democrats tend to lose races that they already assume are lost when they have over a year to get back on track. And looking at the governorship, or less than a year, just under a year to get back on track for 2022. But looking at this race, if you can guess the year, good on you, but this is 2010 in the midterm election year, in which the Republican Party was able to win effectively across the House map in 2010 in the state of Florida, meaning the generic ballot, by nearly 20 points over the Democratic Party. Yet in this governor's race, Rick Scott only wins by 1.1%, 1.2% across the state. This is not a very large victory by any means. Marco Rubio may win by a margin of about 20 points, but he actually doesn't defeat the combined coalition against him. In fact, if you were to add Charlie Crist and Democratic support together, one of them would be able to win. And I know it may seem weird to say if you add the two together, but it was very clear that Charlie Crist did not want to run as a Republican, and very clear that Democrats did not want to drop out, and people knew who they were backing. Marco Rubio was the Republican nominee and put forth as such, and thus, that's why he was able to get 48.9%. Not because people heavily preferred Marco Rubio over Charlie Crist or Kendrick Meek, but only because the opposition vote seemed to have been split. Looking at the governorship here, you can see just how close the race got, and it actually doesn't end here. Democrats did well in 2012 in the state of Florida. Barack Obama was able to defeat Mitt Romney despite all of the polls indicating that Barack Obama was going to lose the state of Florida. And looking at the Senate election, Bill Nelson was able to win. Ben Nelson, or Bill Nelson, let me think here. I believe Ben Nelson was Nebraska. But looking at the margin here, the Democratic Party was able to win in the state of Florida by a margin of over 10 points in a United States Senate election. You are looking at a 13-point victory for the Democratic Party. And looking at elections beyond this point, because Democrats use this as a means to say, or Republicans too, to say that Florida is a red state, but that simply isn't true. Fast forward 2 years later when Republicans had, again, an exceptional year in the midterms with Barack Obama as president, Rick Scott only wins his election by, get this, 1.1%. So as you go through, even red waves, even presidential elections, no matter what, you will see Florida as a competitive state. And that is not really arguable. So for Florida Democrats to say, we're arguing about whether or not Florida was still competitive is to give up and completely ignore the reality in the state of Florida. Just because there are momentous Republican victories doesn't mean the state itself is inherently Republican. It just means that Republicans have done better than Democrats, but not to a point where there is no chance of turnaround, even for 2022, for the Democratic Party. And, some of them say they see tangible changes and credit Manny Diaz for what he has done. But he refers to 2022 as a rebuilding year. And you're starting to see this return to a sense of pushing back on the midterms as a possibility for Democratic victories and more on an idea of building up the next coalition. Now, it makes sense to be realistic. But to act as if some of these races aren't able to be extremely competitive is also wrong. Right now I think Republicans have the advantage, but it is entirely possible that with a new Supreme Court decision on the issue of abortion, or potentially an issue on redistricting in the state of Florida, or potentially a resurgence in Biden support across the nation. Certain things that have been bringing down Joe Biden, bringing down the Democratic Party, and things that haven't been discussed, such as abortion in the Supreme Court, as much as it would if a new decision comes out that would dramatically change Roe v. Wade in June and July. Once those things come out, the trajectory of these races will absolutely change. So Democrats need to go into 2022 at least trying to win these races. They have top-tier candidates, and they are treating this as if, there is still meant to be some type of internal conflict. Democrats have yet to get out of this rut that they have dug for themselves, including 2018, which honestly was quite an embarrassment. I just showed you how Bill Nelson in 2012 won by a margin of 13 points across the state. Well, in the Florida Senate election, Rick Scott, being the only other person on the ballot there, defeated Bill Nelson by 0.2%. It was exceptionally close. Florida is not a red state, and Florida was super close in 2018. Even Ron DeSantis, the governor who is hailed as one of the most electable Republicans for 2022 and 2024, only won against Andrew Gillum by 0.4%. So the state itself, of course, is inherently close. And you could say 2018 was a blue wave year. Why didn't Democrats do well? Well, 2014 was a red wave year. Why didn't Republicans demolish the Democratic Party as they did across a bunch of other states? Even neighboring Georgia went to Nathan Deal by 8 points against a Carter in the state of Georgia. And that state ended up going blue in 2020, whereas Florida went red. Same thing can be applied to 2010. Why wasn't Florida a landslide for the GOP, especially if on the House map they were winning across the state by nearly 20 points? Questions need to be asked, because the answer is that Florida is not this state that is unwinnable for the Democratic Party. But Democrats, I don't think, are on a pathway to victory right now, primarily because of the national environment, but also in addition to that, because of the way they have been treating the state for quite some time now. They neglected to run Spanish-speaking ads in 2018 until right up until the election actually occurred. That's why they make these mistakes. When you see the shifts in areas like Miami-Dade, and you see how Bill Nelson, Hillary Clinton, All of these other candidates outperformed Joe Biden, the Democrat to win Georgia for the first time since 1992, the Democrat to win Arizona for the first time since 1996, winning over Hispanic voters in Arizona but not in Florida. There's a reason why, and there is something you need to take a look at here. The Florida Democratic Party has really made themselves lose many of these races. Florida has always been a competitive state, and there is a reoccurring theme here when you consistently lose elections and the state is still exceptionally close. When you lose even the narrowest of elections, what does that mean? That you were able to put in a good fight, but you simply did not do enough, even when the national environment was on your side. Because arguably one could say that 2014 and 2010 were good showings for the Democratic Party. And I would agree with you. Because of where we were on the national environment, because of where the state was in other offices, somehow the Democratic Party was able to do well in many of these statewide races. A combined coalition could have overcame a Republican had they been able to do it. But it's these very seemingly minuscule mistakes that add up to years and years and years of Republican victories. Because even 2018 can show this. I already showed you how the state of Florida itself was competitive in many elections. But even on the House map, for 2018, the Democratic Party lost the House elections in the terms of the popular vote by 5 percentage points across the state, but nearly came even with the GOP in terms of total representation. 13 Democrats and 14 Republicans. Now, fast forward to 2020, it's 16 Republicans and 11 Democrats. Democrats end up losing numerous seats across the nation, including in the state of Florida. And as we go into our brand new map, luckily for the Democratic Party, the Florida Republican Party did not gerrymander them into oblivion like they could have, and as Republicans did in states like Ohio, where you now only have 2 Democratic representatives out of a total of 15. But things like that actually didn't happen in the state of Florida. And this brand new map that has been proposed by the Florida State House and State Senate together give the Democratic Party an equal chance to return to where they were back in 2018, at near equal footing with the GOP. And that's good for the Democratic Party. But they need to really find a way to win elections. And I know that sounds, me trying to say something easier said than done. And that's true. The Democratic Party has a lot of work to do, and me just saying that they need to get it done doesn't really make it easier for them to do so. But it does bring up a point that the Democratic Party, again, has been provided with the means, has had national circumstances where it was entirely possible for them to win, but simply are failing on messaging. And as we now see, even Manny Diaz, who was hailed as this turnaround chair, as someone who was meant to do wonders for the Florida Democratic Party, you are starting to see the Florida Democrats return to their old senses, return to their previous area where they were simply just bashing any and everyone in state leadership and not treating them as if they were going to change the trajectory of these races. Enough arguing about whether or not the race is competitive, enough arguing about whether or not a race should be contested. Because the Florida Republican Party never gave up. And that's exactly why, even after every single one of these victories, now the Florida Republican Party, as of November 2021, Republicans overtake Democrats in terms of party registration for the first time in decades. That means 10, 20, 30 years, the Democrats have had this advantage over the GOP, and Democrats don't fight for it as much as they could have. Republicans kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and they still are today. They're holding voter registration drives, whereas Democrats are not on different levels. Republicans are doing everything they can. And I think a lot of this had to do with the fact that Democrats really stepped back in 2020 because of COVID-19. They said, we are not going to risk the health of our constituents to do voter registration drives in person, and they decided to do it way too late. The Republican Party never let up in the state of Florida. And whether or not that's a testament to them not being conscientious about COVID-19 or not doesn't matter at this point in time, because they did what they needed to do for party registration. And that's exactly what happened. And now you are seeing the full effects of it. The difference between Democrats and Republicans in Florida is that Florida Republicans are always willing to fight for something. And Democrats, on the other hand, are in here internally fighting themselves about whether or not a race is still competitive. I implore them to look at any previous Florida election result and see just how competitive the state is. Because otherwise, Ron DeSantis wouldn't be president in 2025 in that alternative scenario had they just pushed for 2018 just slightly more. Had they actually done what they were supposed to do, given the national circumstances and given a very strong slate of candidates, that they are getting an even better slate of candidates for 2022, might I add, but they simply and probably are going to mess that up. And that's what needs to be acknowledged. what is going on with the Democratic Party is, in the state of Florida is something that needs to be asked, because at the end of the day, there are so many opportunities that they have missed in the past, and it looks like they are going to miss many more in the future given their current position with their leadership. Because even though they have been given someone who they were extremely excited about before, they don't seem to be hitting the numbers that they need to be. And these conflicts that are arising at the state convention are frankly quite upsetting for really anyone who looks at this from someone who's trying to figure out how either party can win. From my end, I see this as something that is unfortunate simply because I really like competitive races, and I can see the potential here for the Florida Democratic Party, and the Republican Party is absolutely doing very well in the state of Florida. But when you see things from someone who's looking at it from an election analysis perspective, for someone who's looking at it from the Democratic side or even the Republican side even, if this was your leadership, if you were seeing things like this arise for your own political party or for just simply strategizing and working on messaging for campaigns, you see this as mismanagement. And that's exactly what has been driving the state of Florida away from supporting Democrats, and how a lot of it is rooted simply in the Democratic Party's internal divide, and why that needs to be fixed for future elections for very obvious reasons. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below, subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.